Okay, just before I continue, just be aware that we are recording the session, and welcome to this Free State branch webinar where we will be talking CPD, focusing more on OER. But before we continue, let me allow the chair of the Free State branch, HELIG, to do a brief welcome for everyone. Thank you. Over to you, Lashon.
Thank you, Program Director Cisle. On behalf of the Liasa branch, of the Free State branch, I'd like to welcome all of you and say a warm welcome. I understand I have to say warm welcome because it's been extremely cold in Bloemfontein this morning. It started off at -1, so I must say a warm welcome to everybody. I think it's been really, really, really cold this morning. But having said that, I think we have an exciting lineup, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this afternoon's session on CPD framework for academic librarians. I think it's an important area, and Dr. Lilliot, I want to say welcome to you, where you're going to share your expertise with us or have a conversation as such. The areas that we were looking at, I mean, I saw the CPD framework. Some of the things that stood out was AI, OA publishing, systems interoperability, and copyright. I think all academic libraries have been facing these issues in a short period of time, and AI has been the forefront of academic libraries in the past few months. And I think that's something that we all are trying to grapple with. And what is the role of the academic library in terms of AI, in terms of open access publishing and so forth? I think it's something that we all are trying to see how we can re-envision and reimagine the way we do things in academic libraries. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Khadi, who will introduce our speaker, and I hope you all enjoy this session today. I don't know if Cisle wants to take a screenshot now whilst everybody's here. I know towards the end of the program, most people leave before the program ends. So I'm not sure, Cisle, do you want to take a screenshot of the people of all the attendees now?
Okay, I think maybe can we do it later, because I still see there's quite a lot of people that are still logging in.
Sure.
Maybe let's just give them a chance to come in, and then we'll do it later.
Sure. Thanks, Cisle. I'm going to hand you over to Khadi now. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to hand over to Mrs. Mosotwa, a faculty librarian at the University of the Free State. She is currently the deputy branch chair for the HELIG Free State branch. She will be doing a brief introduction of the speaker, Dr. Tony Lilliot. Over to you, Khadi.
Thank you very much, Cisle. Good morning, everyone. I will take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Tony Lilliot, who will be our presenter for today regarding CPD. Dr. Tony Lilliot worked at SAID, South African Institute for Distance Education, an NGO based in Joburg, South Africa, responsible for teaching education. He has contributed to several projects, including OER Africa, the Advanced Diploma for Technical and Vocational Teaching, the National Senior Certificate for Adults and African Storybook. Prior to that, joining SAID, Tony was an associate professor, an NRF C2 researcher, and worked with honors, masters, and PhD students, as well as pre-service teachers. At the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, Tony is the author of over 25 publications in referred journals and books, and has supervised 10 doctoral and 13 master's graduate to completion. Welcome, Tony, and I'm going to hand over to Cisle. We are looking forward to today's sessions, where we'll gain more information on CPD, on OERs. I'm going to hand over to Cisle to do the facilitation for the session. Thanks, Cisle.
Thank you, Khadi, for that wonderful welcome. And just maybe to give a little bit of background, we began this conversation with Dr. Lilliot sometime last year when he had this idea that OER Africa is interested in developing a framework that could assist, continuous professional development for academic librarians. And since OER Africa is more focused on OER, so the framework that he's going to be talking to us about today is more linked to OER. So I think maybe just to go back a little bit on CPD, and I will quote here Luneta 2012, that CPDs should not be seen as a tick-box exercise, because it is a process that we need to engage with. So for that reason, that's why today we are starting this engagement today, just for us to see what framework will work for us. And then at the same time, someone might be asking, what is a framework? And in a simple and a straightforward term, I would say a framework could be a system. I mean, if you were, for example, building a house, you start with the foundation. If that house does not have a foundation, it will definitely collapse. So this is where we are starting this conversation about CPD today, where we are looking at the foundation, and that foundation will be the framework which Dr. Tony Lilliot will be talking to us today. Over to you, Dr. Tony Lilliot.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here and great to see so many people online for this webinar meeting. Yes, I'm Tony Lilliot. You've heard what I've done. I've been basically working at this NGO, CPD, for the last 7 years. Prior to that, I was at WITS for over 20 years. And I want to just point out that I'm not a librarian. So why am I talking to librarians about these things? It's because that I co-run, I'm the co-lead for Open Educational Resources Africa, which is one of our 3 big projects in CPD, which originally CPD stood for the South African Institute for Distance Education, which many of you, well, some of you might have heard of. A few years back, it was sort of rebranded, and it's just called, because we don't only work in distance education, we work in all sorts of things, including quite a lot on openness. We call ourselves CPD, so but that's where the name comes from. So I don't know if anyone was at the any of you were at the AFLIA conference last week, but that I was there. I was in Accra. I'm sure most of you are aware of AFLIA, the African Librarians and Information Organizations. Basically, it coordinates across Africa all sorts of librarians. It was very interesting. The reason I'm talking to you is really partly because of that and the conversations I had with Sitle last year. Although we work mainly with OER, we also work with open access publishing. We also work with the other aspects of openness. And I gave a short talk last week trying to encourage African librarians who are a mixture of branch librarians, in charge of all the libraries in the various countries, but also academic librarians. And encouraging them to embrace openness, because it does seem to be an area of importance. And so I'm going to start. I'll talk a little bit about and mention a framework. And because I'm not a librarian, one of the reasons we're talking to you is as you'll see in a few minutes when I share my screen, we are trying to develop frameworks for different levels of universities. And we're mainly working not in South Africa. So it's great to be talking to you because we'll get a South African perspective on this. And I'm going to ask you to give us feedback on the draft framework. It's very much a draft. Towards the end of my presentation, you'll see it. And I've also, if you can't give feedback today, I've got a Google Forms for you to click on, and you can do that. You can give it. if you want to maybe take it to your colleagues or whatever. The idea is eventually that we try and put together this framework that has gone through a consultation process, and this is part of the consultation process. I'm actually happy to answer questions throughout. I know we've got up to 2 hours. I doubt if we will be the full 2 hours, but you never know. And I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. When I'm presenting, I'll ask Sihle or one of you to maybe just I won't see the chat questions so easily or people's hands. So I'll ask the facilitator to please let us know if people have a question for me. And if I'm going to answer it later on, I'll just say, okay, I do cover that a little later. The presentation isn't that long. It's about half an hour. And then really it's after that, it's sort of discussion. And because this is being recorded, I think it would be very useful if people put ideas in the chat, because I would like to get access to this afterwards, if that's okay with everybody, so that we can, comprehensively make further developments on this framework we're talking about. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and hopefully get the going to minimize that. So I'm hoping everybody can see that. That's the first slide. And you can see the 2 organizations I've mentioned. Oh, well, the one organization is CPD, and an initiative of CPD is OER Africa that's been running since 2008. So I think I'll just go ahead unless anybody has any comments or questions now. So I will go ahead. Okay, if you want to download this presentation, I've put it on Google Slides. So if you can just remember that, the last bit of that URL, tinyurl.com, Liasa CPD. That's the, it doesn't matter, it's uppercase or lowercase, doesn't matter. Okay, so if you actually want to download this, you might want to look at it later, and by the way, it is an OER. This presentation is an open educational resource. I might have forgotten to put the license on it, but you can assume that it is, and I will actually make that change if necessary on the Google Slides. So I'm just leaving that up for a moment in case maybe a facilitator could put it into the, actually probably easier for me to put it into the chat. If I do that, then I have to go out of this. Does that work? Oops. Yeah, and then I can stick it in the chat for you. Copy, chat, and there it is. Okay, so I'm going to go back, get rid of the chat, go back to this. Okay, so I like to make presentations available because if people have connectivity problems or whatever, they can go and look at the presentation separately or afterwards if they want to. Right, so what is OER Africa? I mentioned it's an initiative of CPD. I'm just actually going to just show you what the website looks like. We've got quite a lot of resources on it, and I'll go to the website now. We're currently working on these things, and let me go to the website and then let's go back to this slide. So if I just show you what OER Africa looks like, that's what the web page looks like. And the one of the areas that is most important we've been working on for the last 2 or 3 years are these things we're calling learning pathways, which are basically online tutorials. And then also here are some recent projects we've been working with. This is also useful because it's every month almost since the beginning of the pandemic, we have put up a sort of short blog type communication. And that's going to be, it's worth having a look at those, because we try to, it's short, it's about, you know, a page, 2 pages maybe, and it looks at the various things we've been doing recently. For example, we co-ran a panel discussion on AI, and we heard about AI earlier, with African librarians. We actually ran a panel discussion on that in April. So all of them are shown there, and then we've got some stuff on assessment there, and then but basically things about OER Africa. So that's what OER Africa is all about. Let me just go back to the slide. Okay, so that's our website, and it's basically oerafrica.org if you want to go to it. You can get access to this presentation, so you can just click on it. So what we're currently working on, these CPD frameworks, one for academics, in other words, for lecturers, another one for senior managers, and the third one is the purpose of today's webinar for academic librarians. We're also looking at CPD OER, I'm repeating the word resources because they're educational resources to support the frameworks, and we're currently collaborating with 5 higher education institutions in Africa. We've got them in Botswana and Namibia, and in Zanzibar, and a couple of other places. So that's what we're working with as we develop these frameworks. As I say, the frameworks are for academic librarians and senior managers, and for academics. We've got furthest with the academics one. And the idea is that I'm now going to just explain what the idea of a framework is all about. Oh yes, before we move off OER Africa, there are a number of resources you might be interested in. A couple of years ago, we ran a webinar series with AFLIA. There's one of our blogs, one of our communications is What Roles Do Librarians on the African Continent Play? There's a paper about, which includes librarian stuff, about open educational resources at the Open University of Tanzania. And there's another, there's an article actually around linguistic imperialism, countering it by using African Storybook, which is another of Sadie's big projects. But those are some of the resources you might find interesting. And if we go back to there, I mean, we do a search. By the way, although you've got this thing on the search here, you can just put in librarian or library. Let's put library. And then you do a search, and it should come up with the sorts of resources that are available there. And there they are at the moment. What have we got? Quite a lot, according to this. Anyway, so that's what the website looks like. And now I'm going to be talking about the frameworks. And because we're developing all 3 sets simultaneously, we are furthest developed, as I mentioned, with the academics one, but I'll explain a little bit about them. So the current grant that we are funded, by the way, by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation in the USA. This particular project is funded by them. And one of the outcomes of this current grant, which lasts up to 2025, is to develop these CPD frameworks, senior managers, academics, and academic librarians, as I've mentioned. And the idea is that the frameworks are focused on implementing OER practices at African universities, but that includes quite a lot of stuff inside it. So, for example, for the academics, we're focusing on teaching and learning, trying to assist the institutions to improve the teaching and learning of their lecturers. And part of that might involve the use of OER. So that's the academic librarians one, includes again OER and open access, etc. So the idea then is to improve those things. So what is a framework? So the CPD, just want to give you a quick definition. The one we're sort of working with, we're using as a working definition, the idea of professional learning. And this is taken from a document from a few years back. But the learning results in changes to their knowledge and practices. And in the end, since we are working at higher education institutions, that will help to improve student learning outcomes. Obviously, it also might help the research in the institution as well. But we are sort of focusing quite a lot on teaching and learning, and obviously librarians have a big input to that in the institutions. So what was the framework? CJ mentioned it earlier. He talked about a foundation. We're regarding it as a planning guide. So it's inconsistent with what he said, the planning guide for CPD. And the idea is it will help to support the career development of the professionals. So the professionals are yourselves and the lecturers and the senior management in the institutions. So that's what we're regarding a framework as being about. Why should we be doing that? We think that it's important that CPD professional development should play a greater role in higher education. And although we know that in South Africa, there are quite a lot of centers for teaching and learning in the institutions in South Africa, those are rare across other African countries, having a center for teaching and learning. So we're trying to encourage the concept of those centers or ways of working with teaching and learning for universities. So we're thinking that the planning should be strategic, and it should actually be part of everybody's work every year. And that includes obviously the librarians. Maybe there should be incentives and rewards for CPD. And I did notice when I logged into into this webinar, I saw something about CPD points. So obviously those are included in LIASA, which is interesting. There's also the idea of professional success for yourselves and for academics and for everybody in an institution. The idea of having more important critical skills, we could call them 21st century skills or fourth industrial revolution, all those sorts of things. But the important thing is that people are gaining these new skills for this century. And in case of students and lecturers, that there's active learning going on. Okay, so that's the first reason why. Secondly, we find that, well, not we, but evidence, there's research to show that professionals don't actually participate in CPD as much as they could or should. And in the case of academics, that's often because they are reluctant to renounce existing practices with which they're familiar. But that, if you take away the word teaching, that might also apply to librarians. They have particular practices that they were trained in, and they may be reluctant to renounce them. The problem is in many institutions, there aren't many inducements for self-development. And of course, there's a considerable lack of time. Everybody, most of the time, is very busy. And finally, there's a lack of expertise in pedagogy and capacity of the institutions to develop effective CPD schemes. Now, here we're particularly talking about, probably the whole of the African continent, but it is particularly evident in countries outside South Africa. That was actually, some of those ideas are actually taken from a very useful paper, which I can refer you to. It's actually a report. It's a double report from 2019, which was based in Europe, not based in Africa. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the concept of the framework is important so that professional development is planned over the course of a year or even over the course of multiple years, and that it's not just carried out in an ad hoc and informal manner. So that's why we're trying to essentially develop a framework so that institutions can plan their CPD over time. Okay, so I've got a few slides now which probably refer more to academics, but they are relevant to yourselves. And I think you will see as we go through them that there is relevance to academic librarians in addition to other academics in the institutions. And I'm perfectly aware that many of you are running LIS courses and things like that, LIS programs, and therefore you are not only a librarian, but you're also a lecturer or an academic in your institution. So yeah, I think you'll find these are relevant. So what are frameworks about? The idea behind it is to empower people and also encourage them. Particularly for academics, it's to try and develop their pedagogy. I've got a particular little anecdote that I hope my daughter doesn't mind. She's last year she started as a senior lecturer at a university in South Africa, and she had all her ever since she left school, she's basically been an artist, and then when she was at university, she became a researcher. So she's got a lot of research experience and artistic experience. And she started teaching last July in the institution and found that actually she hadn't got any teaching experience. And it was quite a shock to have to start suddenly teaching honours and master's students. And so therefore, the idea of a framework is to help all lecturers, but particularly new ones, to develop good pedagogies. The idea of reflecting, everybody does need to reflect at some point about what they've been doing over the course of a year. And we go back to the student learning experience because that's part of what all academic institutions are about. And we do want that to be of good quality. Now, this comes from a professional development framework, as you see, from Ireland. So we've been looking at them from around the world, including South Africa. Here are some values of a framework. It acknowledges the student's life experiences and prior knowledge. The idea of contextuality is important, and authenticity and relevance. Again, you see about the idea of developing pedagogy. And teaching and learning itself is a social activity. So we need to understand that. And librarians and academics all have a professional and a scholarly identity, and that should be developed in a framework. And finally, of course, there's lifelong learning, and you'll see that those those values come from a UJ document. Here's one from Regent College and from DHET. I've put a couple of things in here. Again, some of these overlap with the ones I mentioned before, but the idea of CPD as an integral part of people's work. By the way, we're calling it continuous professional development. You will also see it called continuing professional development. Basically, those are the same thing. I think in the USA, they talk a little bit more about continuous, and in the UK and Europe and places, they often talk about continuing professional development. But I don't really mind. We're trying to use one rather than the other at the moment, and we're veering towards the CPD as continuous professional development. principle of individual responsibility, individual librarians taking responsibility for their own learning, but also managers taking responsibility for the people who they work with. And of course, academics as teachers and learners. The DHET document, South Africa's Department of Higher Education and Training document, has 13 principles, which is very nice, but I didn't want to list them all here. So that's the background. Now I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by framework. And what we've done is we've adapted a version actually from the British Council so that we have a visual framework. It's important. Yes, we can have tables and matrices and things like that, but it's good to see it visually. So I'm going to be mainly showing you it visually, and then I will list some of the things we're calling domains. So in a framework, the wedge of that pie, if you like, is a domain. And we've got, obviously, we just put different colors for the different domains. We're calling them domains, but they are areas of learning or whatever, in things that need to be professionally developed. And then the idea is that we have levels of capability, foundation on the inside of the pie, established, going to advanced, so that if we have a look at a full framework, you would see the domains and the levels of the framework. So that's the sort of one we've chosen. So if you look at the pie at the top there, the idea is that we have these three levels, the foundation, and these broadly link to Bloom's a variation on Bloom's taxonomy, where the foundation is remembering and understanding, where the established is where they're analyzing and applying, and then the advanced is creating and evaluating. So we're trying to base it on a fairly standard idea of learning, and we've got some descriptors for those. So this is the sort of detail of what the framework would look like, but at the top level, it is that wheel or pie, whatever you like. Okay, so if an institution wants to use the framework, the idea is that the institution could customize the domains, and then they could develop a CPD policy and resources for their staff. So this could be an institution with a number of, in your case, academic librarians. They would work on what they want, and then they would work to provide resources and assist the academic librarians to be developed. So it can also be done, though, individually or in small groups, where a member of staff can complete some form of self-assessment, and they realize they are good in this area, not so good in that area. And then there are some form of intervention, and that could be a course, but it could also be something smaller than a course. And that's what we've learned over the last few years at OER Africa. If you start asking people to do complete courses, they get a bit bogged down and they may not even complete them. So we're trying to find and assist institutions with, in a way, mini courses, which are OER, so they're openly licensed, and they can be used to professionally develop their staff. So this can be done in groups. It can be done in just one, one library in the institution, a library. If you've got a very large institution, might have multiple libraries, etc., etc. So the idea of you can have it used by a whole institution, or it can be at a smaller level. Okay, so this, I said that we've been developing them for the academics, for the senior managers, and for librarians. And this is what the way we're working towards with the academics, just for your information, to see what a framework might look like. And I won't obviously read through all of these, but we don't think as OER Africa that we can assist an institution with everything. So we're going to try and focus on 3 or 4 areas where we can assist an institution with helping them to professionally develop their staff, and we would focus on particular areas. And so our draft is to say for academics that we will help them with those top 4 areas, working with technology, enhanced teaching and learning, assessment and feedback, teaching and supporting student learning, and then designing learning activities. And the other ones, the institution might find it's important, but they could use that in the future. So we don't think we can assist every institution with everything. It's impossible. And these are some suggested other areas. And different institutions might have different domains. Where is OER here, you're probably asking? Well, if you look at the black writing there on the right, the idea is that we would incorporate aspects of openness in these, the ones that we assist the institutions with, the ones at the top. Now, when we decided on a framework for academic librarians, we just, because we are not librarians, though we have some experience working with them in the past, we said, okay, so how would we help librarians? And this is what we initially put up. You can see most of it's blank because and this is what today's webinar is partly about. We want you to be able to give us some feedback on this. And we thought that an area of possible areas might be OER, open access, open licensing, and then possibly some teaching strategies for information literacy. This was our initial idea, and then I've presented this to a couple of institutions so far. I did present it at AFLIA conference last week. And by the way, if anyone was at the AFLIA conference, could you just mention it in the chat? I'd be interested to know. However, about 2 months back, I was visiting the University of Namibia and spoke to their librarians and said to them, rather like I'm saying to you now, okay, this is what we've been doing. What do you think should be the domains for librarians? And so what they came up with, they actually came up with this for us. And this is partly what I want you to give us some feedback on today. So I'm really at my last 2 or 3 slides now. And these are the sorts of things they said. So they went away and thought about it, and then they came back and suggested these as possible areas. Now, we will only be able to assist institutions with some of these. What we do have some expertise in elsewhere in OER Africa, and we have a memorandum of understanding with AFLIA who could assist us. And so we would assist with some, but obviously an institution might say, well, actually, these are important for us, and these are the ways we're going to think about doing it in the future, maybe over the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So this is what they came up with, and you might better read them all here, but I've actually listed them on subsequent slides. And this is partly what I'd like feedback on. Some of these things I know very little about. And you might say, actually, this one is really important, and this is what librarians should be focusing on, academic librarians should be focusing on for professional development for their staff. But you might say, actually, this is something that's not so important for us. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are mainly working with librarians elsewhere in Africa, but obviously we will be, what the end result in 2 years' time is to have a clear frameworks on our website that institutions could use for themselves. And also we are aiming to run, to identify CPD sort of mini courses that institutions could use to capacitate their staff. And one of those that we're working on with AFLIA at the moment is on openness, generally openness, because it's an area that they indicated that their librarians in multiple countries across Africa would like to know more about OER and copyright and open access and open science and open data, etc., etc. So we will provide some of the, if you like, mini courses. And when I say a mini course, the one we're looking to develop with AFLIA is probably a sort of 4 to 5 week course, 3 hours a week. And it would end up as about probably 20 notional learning hours, something like that, which would be, if you convert it into our credits in South Africa, that would be about 2 credits. So they're mini courses. The idea is that you can complete them fairly quickly and people could complete multiple ones. So that's what they suggested, and that's what I'm going to ask you for feedback on. There they are listed. Sorry, I should have put this up. I thought it was on the next slide as well, but it is. But there we are. They're the sorts of things that they suggested should be included. I've rejigged these a little bit for the final couple of slides, but you do see that open comes up here quite a lot, including ChatGPT, which we heard about earlier, the idea of artificial intelligence. But there's quite a lot of areas that we are not experienced in and we wouldn't be able to provide courses on. However, we might be able to find useful courses that are openly licensed that institutions could use. And we're particularly thinking of online courses, and you might be able to advise us on that. There may be one on scientometric analysis or something like that that you think, we know that this is run in a university in somewhere in the USA or something, and maybe we can get access to that course and it can be openly licensed, so anybody can use it anywhere. Okay, so this is the academic library. These are the domains, the one that I've already told you, it's from University of Namibia. And so there, if you couldn't read them earlier, I've just repeated them here. I've also jigged them around a little bit. So they talked about open licensing, open access publishing, then object identifiers, metadata standards, scientometric analysis, and teaching strategies for information literacy that we mentioned. And then the rest of the list was the interoperability, digital information systems, discovery platforms, search and discovery, AI, and then digital preservation and access and curation. So those are the sorts of things they said would be important for librarians. But I would like you to, I'm finishing my presentation now, I'd like you to give us feedback on that. Is there anything missing? Are they the right ones? Should they be revised? And of course, all they are at the moment are topics. They haven't got the detail behind them. And we are going to be working with librarians, possibly ones from AFLIA, to put in the details of those, of each of those domains. Let's say we choose 4 that we think, or other people also agree that are crucial, and then we need to flesh them out into more detail. So what we're asking here is, are they the right ones? Are any of them missing? What would your priorities for 3 or 4 domains be in such a framework? And do you know of any resources or mini courses that might assist with any of those domains? So that's really what the remainder of today is about, and how long we spend partly depends on what discussion there is here. And there may be stuff that we've completely forgotten about or left out, or we just, because we're not as familiar with academic librarians as we are with academics themselves, lecturers. Might be some areas we've completely omitted, so we'd like to hear those as well. So we really we value your feedback, and we'd be interested to hear what you have to say. So I didn't put this as a tiny URL, but if you get access to my presentation, which you can, as I mentioned earlier, we've actually put, if you want to answer not today or in the chat, or you want to share it with your colleagues, you could, I'll put this in the chat, because this is these questions essentially in a Google form. So that's what I'm going to do, because this is the last slide. Somebody remember, yes. And then I'll put that in the chat so that you can get access to it. If you want, you could start filling it in now. You could listen to what other people are saying. There could be stuff in the chat. And then, of course, we'd be encouraging people to speak today. And I'll leave that all up to the facilitator. So I'm basically through now. Obviously, I'm happy to answer all sorts of questions. I'm going to now put this in here we are. I'll put this in the chat so that people got access to it. Copy, put that down there. And I'm going to stop. Well, I'll stop sharing. I might need to share again in a moment, because you might want to see those. In fact, I won't stop sharing it. I'll go back to those slides, but let me put this in the chat. Send to him. Everyone. There we are. Okay, so that's in Google Forms is in the chat. And if you wanted to look at either these or these domains again, they are here, and there are the questions. So we can sort of work between these 3 areas, or 4 slides. Okay, so I'm done. Thank you very much, facilitator. If you would like to take over.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elliott, for that wonderful lunch talk. Very thought-provoking. And as I was listening, I thought to myself, perhaps this is a way of upgrading and updating academic librarianship. And I then asked myself, how much of this considers the Global South systematic and structural challenges? Because as we we could be in institutions where they are well-funded, everything is there, but however, there are other challenges that we are faced with. How much of this, considers the systematic challenges that we have, as well as structural challenges that we have, and also how much does it consider the Global South context?
If that's a question to me, I'm happy to answer it. The idea is that we are mainly working with the Global South. The thing is, if we go to the sorts of frameworks that are out there in the literature, they are mainly from the Global North. And we are very much aware, and that's one of the reasons I went to the AFLIA conference last week, because at that conference, there's a big mixture of all sorts of universities from all over sub-Saharan Africa, some of which are well-resourced and some which are not well-resourced. And I would say that many of the LIASA members are relatively well-resourced compared to many other African universities. So we would say, yes, this should definitely take into account the limited resources available in many universities. So I would say, so it's a very important point. However, we would like to say that hopefully connectivity will be improved over the next 5 to 10 years. And if you remember, we've said that an institution could take this wheel and tailor it to their own institution. So they could actually take out all of these and put in the main areas that they want to focus on. Part of it is just to get the conversation moving.
Thank you so much. Let me, before we open for questions and comment, let me just quickly check the online part and see what is there.
I'll stop sharing for a minute. I can easily share again if people want to see it.
Yes. Okay. From Surenda, she is saying a very informative and enlightening presentation. Should also consider cutting edge priorities such as UN SDG goals, empowering and strengthening the digital south through solid, exciting digital training and tutorials for African academic librarians. I don't know if you have a comment on that from Surenda.
Okay, that's fine. I don't have any comment at the moment because the idea is that one might take on those priorities, the SDG goals, Digital South trainings and tutorials. So yes, I would agree with her. It's useful to have that. But basically, I'm going to take away all these suggestions and see what we can eventually come up with. So thank you for that comment, Surendra.
Yes. Anushi, she said, thank you for an enlightening talk. And then she said, most of the institutions have financial constraint. I think you have slightly touched on that, which hinders CPD. And then she goes on to say the rapid changing of technology advancement is also challenging for librarian to keep up with. As soon as we learn the system, another one emerges. I see you have a smile there. I think there is a comment that you might want to share there, because what she's saying, it is essentially something that we are faced with. You know, there is a constant change as we speak right now. AI is like right on our doorstep, and we are trying to catch up. Yeah,
I mean, we can't help that. I mean, you're working in libraries, but I mean, throughout all our professional lives, things are constantly changing. And as we mentioned, the AI is just one of the most recent things that might cause big changes. Yeah, that's why we're saying that if an institution wanted to adopt something like the framework, and I think it answers a question that's just further up in the chat from Nolusendiso. How does it address the unique needs and challenges faced by academic libraries? The idea is that it's not one framework. I'd like to make that clear, that we're not suggesting here is the framework for all libraries. It's not that. The idea is here are some suggestions for a framework, and we would maybe in the end, by in 2 years' time, what we might have up on our website are, let's say, 3 exemplar frameworks for academic libraries, academic librarians, and they could be, one for a very small private university, another one for a university, and a larger university that is not well resourced at all. And there could be a third framework for a very well-resourced library. And these would the idea, as I mentioned again, these can all be taken and tailored for their own institution. And our job, part of our job, will be to try and identify the sorts of resources that institutions could use to help professionally develop their staff.
Thank you so much for that response. Tato, I think the leadership is here. They will take that into account as the engagement and the conversation continues. And now I'm going to open for comments, and anyone that would like to say something. I think I saw a hand from Mr. Molepo. Mr. Molepo?
Oh, yes, I lowered my hand because I thought perhaps I should just type in the chat. So I was trying to type in the chat instead. But since you gave me an opportunity to ask, I would like to ask Dr. Lilliot a question regarding the extent of the literature that was used to propose this draft framework. So he mentioned, for example, that the draft proposed framework is adapted from the British Council Framework for Teachers. He also mentioned a report, a European report that mentioned barriers that they have identified in terms of why people might not be at the level that this framework proposes. And then he also mentioned something about, I can't remember, but literature from Ireland. So I just wanted to find out if, in addition to this literature that he has already mentioned, did they consult any other literature, especially from this side of the world?
Good question. We were looking at professional development globally, and we tried to find literature on professional development in the global south, and we didn't find that much. So I would be very I'd be very pleased. So in other words, we had a limited time to do a sort of survey of what's out there. The only reason we chose the British Council one was that it was a nice visual version instead of a great big matrix, which is quite difficult to read through. So we chose that for that reason. If you know of useful literature, please email me with suggestions. I'm going to put my email in the chat because you might know, you see, you might know of literature that we were totally unaware of. And as you'll appreciate, to get this thing up and moving, we had to base it on what we could get access to. If you know of literature from the Global South on professional development that would be useful for us to incorporate, then please, I would be very grateful to know just, you know, some links or titles of articles. That would be very helpful. And remember, we are not experts in libraries, so we were tending to focus more on teaching and learning for academics. So, you know, some of this is quite, we are not, we need more information around libraries, and that's why we're engaging with you today, and that's why we've got an MOU with AFLIA. For those two reasons, we know that this is an area that we are not as experienced in as we are in the other two areas. So please, we would be very much pleased to receive those. Remember, this is a work in progress. It's very much a work in progress. We started this grant, we've been going for about a year, and we've got 2 more years to go. So it's only at the end of it that we will have a much more comprehensive report and suggested frameworks. So at the moment, they are draft frameworks, and they're based on what we could find. So I'd be very, very pleased if you could send us information on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Malepo, and for that response. I don't know if there are any further questions, responses, feedback, criticism, everything is open. Whatever that you have, you're welcome to share. Okay, you can shoot if you are ready. I think I heard someone speaking. Okay, so in the absence of any further questions, I would say maybe in closing, I'd like to say that professional development programs for academic librarians can only succeed and be sustained by academic librarians only if the academic librarians, play a significant role from the inception. Like in this case, this is only starting. So I think it's a good space for us as academic librarians to get in and engage, as well as going forward to the implementation phases, all the way to evaluation. Remember, when we are doing a framework, right now it might work, it might succeed, but in 3-4 years time, the contextual environment might be different. So we might need to relook at all of that. So, and I also want to say that the program must also be relevant to academic librarians' pedagogical approaches, because I think that is very important. It's one of the reasons why we are here today, so that we see from a pedagogy perspective what is relevant for us as academic librarians. And then lastly, the contents need to enhance both the teaching and learning outcomes. So it should not be just a talk shop where we just talk and nothing happens. We have another webinar in 6 months' time. We have not done anything. So I will put this on HELIG table. How do we find a way to move forward? How do we engage with OER Africa and SAID to make sure that this actually works and it benefits us as academic librarians? I think that's all I'll just say in closing. And then I will ask Ms. Pelisa Vanda to close for us with a couple of thank yous.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It has been such an honor to be part of this wonderful event. On behalf of the HELIG Free State branch, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Tony Lilliot of OER Africa as well as SAID. The webinar on CPD framework for librarian in African universities is much anticipated topic among librarians and has accelerated us to understand the concept of openness and OER framework more. And we hope that we will all participate and comment on the document or on the link that has already been shared. So I would like to say my sincere thanks to our HELIG Free State Chair-elect, Ms. Khadi, as well as the chairperson, Mr. Lashan Neka, for the initiation and organizing such a game changer event, and various departments who handled the event throughout. Also a wide round of applause and thanks to Mr. Sihle Bloss, our program director, who made the program a memorable one. Finally, I would like to thank all of you present here for making the time to be with us today and helping us make this webinar a great success. Also want to thank myself, of course, for thanking you today. This is not an easy task. Thank you, everyone, and happy Thursday. Thank you.